Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's call at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. We're going to give it about 30 more seconds or so to allow others to join the call, but we will get started soon. Okay, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining today's call. It's the National House campaign call for universal, stable, affordable housing. My name is Renee Willis, Vice President for Field and Communications with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and I'll be facilitating today's conversation. So on today's call, we'll be joined by HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge, who will discuss the historic opportunity to get major housing investments in the infrastructure bill. Dan Threet, research analyst with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, will provide an overview of this year's data from Out of Reach 2021. Roxy Keynes from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities will provide details about an upcoming Child Tax Credit Navigator training. We'll also get the latest from NLIHC's Erase, which is End Rental Arrears to Stop Evictions project. And we'll also discuss how to advance house priorities through the infrastructure package on Capitol Hill. And we'll hear updates from the field and more. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available after the broadcast. You'll be able to find the recording on our website. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's special guest, HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge. Secretary Marcia Fudge is the 18th Secretary of the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development and is the first Black woman to serve in this important role in over 40 years. Throughout her career, Secretary Fudge has been a fierce advocate for low-income people and their communities. While serving as U.S. Representative for the 11th District of Ohio, Secretary Fudge served as the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. Before her time on Capitol Hill, she made history as the first Black and first female mayor of Warrensville Heights, Ohio. In her current role, Secretary Fudge has called for ensuring that housing is a human right, expanding rental assistance, investing in affordable housing, creating more opportunities for homeownership, and closing the racial wealth gap. Thank you, Secretary Fudge, for joining us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. You're very kind, Renee. I appreciate it. Thank you. And I want to thank everyone who is joining this call today. I am especially grateful for all that you've done to help our communities weather this COVID-19 crisis, including helping low-income tenants understand their rights and navigate the resources available to them through the pandemic. Yet despite all the progress we have made in building from the pandemic, we know that we still have much work to do. I recently had the honor of authoring the preface for the Coalition's Out of Reach report, which outlines in starkest terms the urgent need to advance housing security in America. Let me assure you all that America will not simply return to the position we occupied before the pandemic, to an America beset by crumbling houses and buildings, to an America grappling with a crisis in affordable housing, not with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House, not with people like me serving in their administration, and not with folks like you doing your part. We will build back better together. I know President Biden is committed in his head and in his heart to helping more people find a stable and dignified place to call home. He has made that commitment clear. The president has proposed a budget that requests an additional $9 billion for HUD. And this amount represents a 15% increase from the most recent budget. In addition to the vital funding contained in his 2022 budget, the president has called for historic new investments into America's housing sector. All told, this Build Back Better agenda would help build or restore more than 2 million affordable homes. I am honored to help champion the president's vision to making housing for all a reality in our nation. I'm doing everything I can to push for the housing investments our country so desperately needs. I know the folks joining this call are doing the same. We all understand the importance of investing in housing. We know that when we invest in housing, we invest in people. Maya Angelou wrote, "The ache for home lives in all of us, the safe place where we can go as we are and not be questioned." I am honored to fight alongside you, all of you, to help more people experience the safety and security of a good home. I know you have been on the front lines advocating on behalf of folks experiencing housing insecurity, whether they be regarding the federal eviction moratorium or for the emergency rental assistance dollars that were being passed through the American Rescue Plan, for strengthening fair housing, and so many other issues that impact low-income renters and households. That's why I'm counting on you all. And I really mean that, to keep up the vital work you are doing to advocate with members of Congress to ensure that this truly once-in-a-lifetime opportunity does not pass us by. We need to ensure that Congress passes both the bipartisan infrastructure framework and the housing investment proposals that are part of the president's Build Back Better agenda, which will need to advance through budget reconciliation. Together, these two packages will bring historic investments to the American people. I'll say it again. I'm counting on all of you. Communities all across America are counting on us to get this done together. I'm doing everything in my power, but I cannot do it alone. Together, we can help ease the ache for home that lives inside all of us, and we can put an affordable and dignified home within reach for every American. Thank you again for all you do and will continue to do in the weeks and months ahead. With that, I have the pleasure of turning the call back. Thank you very much.
And thank you so very much, Secretary Fudge. It is a real pleasure having you on the call. And we know that you have other commitments and you won't be able to take calls or, take questions today, but we certainly do appreciate you for being with us on this call. And thank you also for writing the preface, as you mentioned, the preface to Outer Reach. I'm sure that, and we hope that you will use the data from Outer Reach as your predecessors had in sharing the news and the message about affordable housing. So continue the good work, and thank you again so very much for being with us today.
Thank you, absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you. So we'll do just a little bit of housekeeping as we transition to the next speaker. So for the remainder of the call, we will take a few questions. So if you have any questions for any of our speakers, you can use the Q&A feature that's at the bottom of your screen to ask your question. So we're going to move over and transition over to Out of Reach. And we just spoke about it a bit. And as many of you know, we released Out of Reach last Wednesday. Out of Reach is the coalition's signature research publication that documents the significant gaps between renters' wages and the cost of rental housing across the United States. Dan Threet from the coalition will provide an overview of this year's data from Out of Reach 2021. So Dan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Renee. Good afternoon, all. Let me say what a distinct honor it is to be following Secretary Fudge on the call. So as Renee mentioned, last week we did release Out of Reach 2021, which shows the extent to which the pre-pandemic status quo was unsustainable for low-wage workers and low-income renters more generally. One of the reasons why the economic downturn of 2020 has been so devastating to low-income households is precisely because so many could not afford their homes. And Out of Reach shows that this is a pervasive nationwide problem. On the slide you see here, I'll start to explain what we're looking at in this report. So each year, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition releases Out of Reach, which highlights the gulf between the wages that people earn and the price of decent rental housing in every state, metropolitan area, and county in the United States. The central figure in the report what we call the housing wage, represents what a full-time worker would need to earn every hour in order to be able to afford rent and utilities at fair market rent. Now, built into the housing wage are two important assumptions. First, when we talk about what a household can afford, we're relying on the assumption that no more than 30% of a household's gross income should be consumed by housing costs. Second, we rely on HUD's fair market rents, or FMRs, to estimate what households moving today would need to spend for modest rental housing. HUD produces FMRs by drawing on 5 years of American Community Survey data. Fiscal year 2021 FMRs rely on 2014 to 2018 American Community Survey data with a few adjustments. The base rent in an FMR area is typically set at the 40th percentile of standard quality gross rents. So these are the rents for homes priced below the middle of the market, not for what we might call luxury housing. Now this year, the national housing wage for a 2-bedroom apartment is $24.90 an hour. And the housing wage for a 1-bedroom apartment is $20.40 an hour. While there is variation across the country in housing costs and in minimum wages, nowhere in America do minimum wage full-time workers earn the 2-bedroom housing wage for their area. In the vast majority of places, in fact, a full-time minimum wage worker cannot afford a modest 1-bedroom rental home in their area either. Now you can see some of that variation in the cost of housing on the state map on the next slide. The 2-bedroom housing wage ranges from $14.60 an hour in Arkansas up to $39.03 an hour in California. While in states with cheaper housing markets, one needs to earn less to afford a decent home, the actual wages earned in those states are generally correspondingly lower. In Mississippi, for instance, where one needs to earn $15.21 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom rental home, the average renter's wage is $12.23 an hour. So what matters here is not just the sheer cost of rent, but the shortfall between housing costs and wages. And as you can see in the next chart, we also visualize this in the report. In Hawaii, California, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Maryland, there's a gap of more than $10 an hour between what the average renter earns and what they would need to earn to afford a 2-bedroom home in their area. In the state-specific tables in our report, it's easy to calculate this shortfall for your own state. Now, on the next slide, I want to show you a county-level map that indicates how many hours a week minimum wage workers must work to be able to afford a 1-bedroom home. Now, that's in contrast to the state map, which shows the 2-bedroom housing wage. This map already takes into account states and counties that have minimum wages set higher than the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. There are a few things to note here. First, you can spot some high-cost metro areas on this map. There are pockets of dark blue around Miami, Austin, San Francisco, and New York City, for instance. In those areas, a minimum wage worker would need to work more than 80 hours every week to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. But this isn't just a problem for high-cost metros. The second thing to note are the categories in the gradient on the right. Only in the lightest shade can a minimum wage worker afford a 1-bedroom home while working one full-time job. Everywhere else, one job is not sufficient. In just 218 counties nationwide, not including Puerto Rico, can a minimum wage worker with a standard 40-hour work week afford a 1-bedroom apartment at fair market rent. In other words, in 93% of all counties, a full-time minimum wage worker cannot afford even a 1-bedroom rental home. On average, a minimum wage worker needs to work 79 hours a week, all year round, to afford a 1-bedroom. They would need to work 97 hours per week to afford a 2-bedroom. Many individuals and families, needless to say, would find it impossible to work those hours. Now, Out of Reach compares housing wages to what workers across the country are actually earning, as you can see on the next slide. We estimate what the average renter earns from the Bureau of Labor Statistics quarterly census of employment and wages, alongside American Community Survey data. And our estimates of the median hourly wages by occupation comes from the BLS's Occupational Employment Statistics Program. The BLS conducts a semi-annual survey to produce wage estimates. for over 800 occupations at the national, state, and metropolitan levels. One notable finding in this year's report is that 11 of the 20 most common occupations in that survey have median hourly wages less than the national 1- and 2-bedroom housing wage. Food and beverage serving workers make $11.87 an hour on average, including tips. And retail sales workers make $12.95 an hour. Home health aides at $13.94 an hour also have a median hourly wage less than the 1- or 2-bedroom housing wage. Even before the pandemic, these workers would struggle to pay their rent. And we know from national surveys and other sources that the industries most likely to employ low-wage workers were also most likely to be disrupted during the pandemic in 2020. Earlier this year, the Economic Policy Institute estimated that more than 80% of the jobs lost in 2020 were held by wage earners at the bottom of the wage distribution. So many of these workers today are also dealing with the after effects of lost income, furloughs, or layoffs. And for many, that means accumulating rental arrears. Now, pulling back from specific occupations, on the next slide, you can see the national hourly wage distribution for all wage and salary workers. The 50th percentile hourly wage of $21.22 an hour is enough to afford a 1-bedroom at the FMR, but not a 2-bedroom. That is remarkable in its own right, but it gets worse when you note that the average wage for renters, which is not shown here, is even lower. On average, renters make $18.78 an hour. Now, there are, of course, profound racial disparities to grapple with here as well. And one chart that we've been sharing for a few years, which is on the next slide, compares the wage distributions by race or ethnicity compared to the housing wages to show the extent to which Black and Latino workers face more significant struggles. Each group of columns along the x-axis in this chart compares the relevant percentile wage for white workers, Black workers, and Latino workers. For instance, at the 50th percentile wage, we see that 50% of white workers earn $23.31 or less per hour, while 50% of Black workers earn $17.81 an hour or less, and 50% of Latino workers earn $17.24 or less. The median white worker makes enough to afford a 1-bedroom rental home at fair market rent, but the median Black worker and the median Latino worker do not. Racial and ethnic income inequality means that national averages that don't take race into account will miss an important dimension of who is most disadvantaged by this system. While we don't have the same kind of data available for Native American and Alaska Native workers, we have plenty of reasons to think that they too face more barriers to affording their homes. Compared to white workers, they have lower odds of employment, lower earnings, and less likelihood of being employed in management and professional occupations. In part as a result of these disparities, households of color are more likely than white households to be housing cost burdened, spending more than 30% of their income on housing. Now, it's one thing to see all of these sobering numbers, and another to fully grasp their significance. While low-wage workers cannot afford homes priced at the fair market rent where they work, they may be forced to live far away, to take up long commutes. They may be at greater risk of housing instability or homelessness when already strained budgets meet emergencies and unforeseen expenses. The vast majority of very low-income renters are housing cost burdened, forced to spend sums they can't afford on housing, and cost-burdened renters are more likely to cut back on basic necessities like food and medical care. The report thus amply demonstrates the need for higher wages and better labor policy, as well as the need to address the housing affordability crisis directly. That means bridging the gap between wages and housing costs by expanding rental assistance, but it also calls for an expansion of the supply of affordable housing through significant, sustained investments in tools like the Housing Trust Fund. Now, on this slide here, you'll see the URL for our report's website, which is nlihc.org/OOR for Out of Reach. On the website, you can find a copy of the report, as well as interactive tools that can help you identify the housing wages for homes of all sizes in your area, minimum wages, mean renter wages in your area by state, county, or metro, as well as occupational wage data. We always welcome comments and questions, and you can reach us at this email address here, research@nlihc.org. I will pause here, and if time permits, I'm happy to answer questions. Otherwise, I will do so in the chat.
Thank you, Dan. We do have a few questions that came in, so thank you, everyone. So the first question is there any consideration to revising the chronically homeless definition to include people with justice involvement, i.e. the current 90 days to 180 days?
Well, that is a question that I think might fall outside the purview of out of reach. I would defer to the policy team that might know more about work on that front.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can follow up with the person who asked this question as well. There were a bunch of questions also regarding where to find out of reach. And again, as Dan mentioned, it is at www.nlihc.org/OOR for out of reach. Let's see, any other questions? Here's one. Does the report separate out analysis on households with children?
That's a good question. No, we do not discuss that in detail in this report. If you have particular questions about what we can and can't say about households with children, you're more than welcome to email us. I think from time to time, we have gotten questions about household size and how that plays a role in the report. And I think we have some basic demographic information that we can share about the composition of renter households, how many have children, how many do not, because we do know that households with children are more apt to struggle to be able to afford rent. They'll very often will need larger apartments. And so sometimes when we're asked why we focus on a 2-bedroom housing wage, one of the reasons there is that many households with children absolutely have to have homes of that size. We've also seen, too, I'll just add as an aside, that the household pulse surveys work during the pandemic over the course of the last 16 months has showed that renters with children are much more likely to have fallen behind on their rent than renters generally.
Great, thank you, Dan. And another question, when talking about the 30% housing cost to define those who are burdened, does this just include rent or mortgage, or also utilities?
That's a great question. No, this is a gross rent variable, so it includes the utilities that they would pay as well.
Thanks, Dan. And another question, do we know how many renter households have 2 wage earners? Most of this narrative seems to assume a single wage earner.
Mm-hmm. That's right. We do have to make some decisions in how to estimate the housing wage. And in 2019, I believe it was the case that 47% of renter households had just 1 adult. So we can either set the baseline at 1 income earner, or we can set it at 2 income earners. And if we set it at 2, we would be excluding a significant number of renters. On top of that, even for households who have 2 adults in the household, it's very often the case that not both of them can be full-time wage earners. Certainly not even the case that both of them could be working 40 hours every week all year round. I believe the average, the last time I looked, for renter households with 2 adults and at least 1 child, the average number of hours worked per week was something like 67. So there would be a significant struggle regardless.
Okay, thanks, Dan. And someone asked, what report did you just reference about families with kids struggling during the pandemic?
Oh, sure. That's the Household Pulse Survey, which is published by the Census Bureau. For the last 16 months or so, they've been conducting surveys in real time to try to track the harms that we've seen from the pandemic. And a section of the report does dig into renter experiences specifically.
Another question, do you display the gap between a state's minimum wage and the housing wage on a national map with each state indicated?
That's a good suggestion. Our report is apt. It's time for some new graphs. Maybe that's something we'll consider for next year. I don't think we have that yet, but.
And another question, let's see, it says, what are some of the most notable trends you're seeing, whether alarming or positive?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the report does not dig in too deeply into trends over time for a few reasons. One, purely technical. Every now and again, the Department of Housing and Urban Development changes the way they calculate fair market rents, which would change how we estimate our housing wages, which might make a year-to-year comparison somewhat less clear or fair. There are a few things we can say, though. It's been a consistent long trend that minimum wage workers obviously have not been able to afford decent rental housing in most areas across the country, not least since the federal minimum wage has stagnated since 2009 or so. We also have seen time and again from one report to another that the mean renter wage is not sufficient to afford a 2-bedroom home in many counties and metropolitan areas and states across the country. I will say that we do see some variation in how higher state set minimum wages affect the map I was talking about earlier. And this is not surprising, right? That states with a higher minimum wage would see some areas in their state where a full-time minimum or a minimum wage worker would need to work fewer hours to be able to afford a 1-bedroom rental home. So we've seen some shifts there as some states like Arkansas and Missouri have continued to increase their minimum wage. But finally, I would say, whenever talking about these trends, it's important not to lose the forest for the trees, because while we might see some changes in the margins, the picture as a whole is one in which many low-wage workers and most low-income renters can't afford their housing.
Fantastic, thank you. Let's see, we'll take maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Here's a question. Any opportunity to characterize the special disadvantages for people coping with disabilities?
That's an interesting question. The data that we're gathering, I don't think it helps us identify which individuals who have disabilities and are in the labor force, what their wages are. So we can't disaggregate that for the purpose of this report. And since much of the focus in the report here is just drawn from those sources that give us wage data, I don't think there's a lot we could say on the basis of the source material about that. Now, in our other annual report, The Gap, which is released every March, we do go into a bit further detail about the composition of the lowest income renters and the extent to which they are households who have a head of household who has a disability, and the extent to which they have special struggles there. There are a couple other things I could say about this. In Out of Reach, we do identify what someone on disability payments could afford in rent, and it's gross insufficiency everywhere. And then finally, someone we work with quite often, the Technical Assistance Collaborative, TAC, I forget what the C stands for, produces an annual report called Priced Out, which goes into that in some greater detail as well, and it's worth a look.
Fantastic. And the last question, Dan, are housing wages available by zip codes?
I don't think I mentioned that, but it is on the slide, so I'm glad someone asked. Yes, if you go to the bottom of the page, when you go to the web, our landing page, you'll find a search bar that asks if you'd like to plug in a zip code, and you can find housing wages by that means as well.
Fantastic, thank you, Dan. And so we do have a lot of questions that are coming in. We'll do our best to try and answer some of those questions during during the duration of the call. But we really do thank you, Dan, for all the great work that you and the research team are doing on this. And you had a very successful launch of Out of Reach. And thank you, for sharing this data with us, and because it will certainly be used in advocacy all across the country. So thank you, Dan.
We certainly hope so. Thank you, Renee.
Indeed. All right, so we're going to move on to Roxy Keynes, who is from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. And Roxy will provide details about an upcoming Child Tax Credit Navigator training. So hi, Roxy, and thank you for joining us today. And the floor is all yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I am going to provide a brief overview about the child tax credit opportunity and the need for outreach and some resources that are available, including the Navigator training. So first, just a couple of points on the opportunity. So the American Rescue Plan provides, through the child tax credit expansion, almost every family will receive money from this credit. This includes families that haven't filed a tax return in recent years, as well as families that do not have recent income. And it also includes families that include members who do not have Social Security numbers. So as long as the child being claimed for the credit has a Social Security number, the tax filer can have a Social Security number or an individual taxpayer identification number. This expansion to the child tax credit can reduce child poverty by more than 40%. Qualifying households will receive $3,600 for each child under 6 and $3,000 for children between the ages of 6 and 17. And we have half of the credit being issued as advance payments between July and December, and the remaining half families can get when they file a tax return in 2022. The credit is not a loan and it does not impact public benefits. So all of this sounds very great, but there is a problem, there is a concern. So on the next slide, we see that most families will get the credit automatically if they filed a 2019 or 2020 tax return, or if they use the non-filer portal to get stimulus payments last year, they will get the payments automatically for their kids. But this still leaves a number of households that will not get the payments automatically, even though they're eligible. So this includes families that may have more challenges and barriers to actually get the payments. People who haven't received stimulus payments or haven't received them for their children, people who have very low incomes and are not required to file a tax return, and people who have limited access to technology. These are some of the challenges and some of the ways that people will need help to actually sign up for the CTC payments. Normally, volunteer income tax assistance sites, also known as VITA, would be a natural resource to help people. However, many VITA sites are closed for the year or they are operating at very low capacity. So there is a need for other groups to get involved to provide support. So on the next slide, you can see two key ways to provide support include helping non-filers use the non-filer portal for the child tax credit payments, or helping them file a 2020 tax return if they actually need to do that. So I want to share just a little bit more about the non-filer portal and the resources that are available for that. The IRS non-filer portal will allow people to submit their information so that they can receive the advanced CTC payments. And that portal will also allow people to claim any missed stimulus payments as the recovery rebate credit. So someone can claim the first and second stimulus payments in this way. And by using the non-filer portal, one is completing and submitting a 2020 tax return. And so the information from the tax return can also be used to help someone get their third stimulus payments. And we have created a guide to using the portal that includes screenshots and step-by-step information so that you can actually help people complete this process. In addition to the IRS non-filer portal, there is another portal available, the Child Tax Credit Update portal. And this allows people to manage their payments. So if someone decides that advance payments are not right for them and they prefer to receive the full child tax credit at tax time, they can opt out of the advance payments. They can also change or add bank account information through this portal. And eventually there will be an opportunity to add other updates that can impact the amount of one's credit. So this includes changes to income, marital status, or the number of children being claimed. And so we have created a guide to using this portal as well. For this portal, one needs to have an account through the IRS or through using ID.me. And so our Child Tax Credit Update Portal Guide includes steps on how to create the ID.me account, which is a process that many people will need support on. So here are some of the resources that we have available. If you go to taxoutreach.org/coronavirus, that will lead you to everything that is available now, including the links to the portal guides, as well as future resources that are available. So we have an FAQs page, we have our guides to portals, we also have a guide to getting started with CTC outreach that highlights some of the different ways that you can support outreach, even if you cannot support helping people use the non-filer portal. There are a number of ways to contribute to outreach efforts. And this week, we will be adding several other materials and resources. So we'll have flyers and mailers that you can customize, along with call and text scripts, newsletter and press release templates, social media posts, a PSA script, and the center is releasing a research paper that will highlight the need for outreach and what different groups can do and who are non-filers for the child tax credit. We have hosted a training on being a CTC navigator, and the recording to that training will be added to our website as well. And that training included a walkthrough, a step-by-step walkthrough of each of the portals, in addition to sharing some of the opportunities and the ways that you can contribute to CTC outreach as a navigator. So we hope that you use these resources, and if you have questions or need other resources, please do reach out. Our contact information is on the next slide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roxy. We do have a few questions that came in. One question is, how can we drive or encourage localities to ensure that all eligible families become recipients? And the second part of that question actually is, does the funding specify a role for local, county, city agencies and nonprofits locally funded to provide services?
So the second part of the question, does the funding specify I'm not sure what funding is being referenced then. I can say that there's a huge opportunity for outreach here on all levels. So city and local levels can contribute and coordinate for outreach efforts. And then could you repeat the first part of the question, please?
Yeah, absolutely. 1 second. And the first part, 1 second. My screen is moving on me. There's so many questions coming in. 1 second. All right. Okay, while I'm looking for that, let me ask you another quick question. So what about, the question is, what about people who do not work or have not worked in several years? Are they eligible to receive the child credit?
Yes, they are eligible. And this is a point that we really want to have be prominent in an outreach message to make sure that people know if they don't have income for this year, they are still eligible for the child tax credit. Additionally, if someone hasn't filed taxes in a long time and maybe they owe taxes and so they're concerned about filing, they're eligible for the credit, and the advance payments that are issued monthly will not be offset to pay back any taxes owed. When someone files taxes in 2022 to get the remaining portion of the child tax credit, then that amount of the credit can be offset to go to past due taxes.
Okay. Another question, are these payments buffered from debt collectors? And can a household still get this credit if they owe the IRS back taxes?
Okay, so I think I answered the second part of that question already. Yes, they can get the advance payments. They will not be impacted for the remaining portion in filing a tax return. If someone owes back taxes, their refund may be reduced to pay those taxes. For private garnishments, there is not a federal rule that protects the payments from private garnishment. So that is something that could take place, whether that is through the advance payments or through the remaining credit when people file a tax return in 2022.
Okay. And the last question, and I'll have to email, or we'll have to email you the question that I have skipped over. So I do apologize to that, to you for that, and to the person who asked that question. But the last question here is, it says, I know the credit does not count as income, but do you know if private nonprofits could increase rent if they know clients are eligible for the credit? And the second part of that is, are these funds able to be garnished in any way? Thank you.
Okay, so the first part of that question, if groups could increase rent because they know that people are eligible for the benefits, for the child tax credit, I am not aware of something that says that that is permissible. Maybe someone else on the call is able to speak to that, but I have not seen anything on that.
Okay. All right, well, thank you so very much, Roxy, for joining us today. Really do appreciate your time and the information you shared. So we do have Roxy's contact information on the screen if you want to get in touch with her to ask her a question directly. But again, Roxy, thank you so much for being with us today, and enjoy the rest of your day. All right, so we're going to turn it over now we're going to go into field updates. So we'll hear from our partners in the field to hear what's happening in Missouri, Minnesota, and California. And first, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Owsley, who is the Director of Policy and Advocacy with Empower Missouri. Sarah, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting us to join you. My name is Sarah Owsley. I'm the Policy and Organizing Director for Empower Missouri. We're a 120-year-old nonprofit who practices policy advocacy in our state around issues of poverty, including affordable housing. Missouri is currently experiencing a pretty significant COVID surge, and we're #1 in the country for new cases. This is happening in large part because of vaccine hesitancy and general disbelief of the virus or the seriousness of the virus. We have never had a statewide mask mandate, never had an eviction or utility shutoff moratorium. And in fact, some of our counties have seen increases, more than doubling of evictions during the CDC moratorium. Our state has been slow to get assistance dollars distributed. A good portion of that funding went to the Missouri Housing Development Commission, who recently put a funding dashboard on their website. They're going to receive about $324 million, which will go a long way to help our communities, but less than $40 million of that have actually been distributed so far. The applications are cumbersome and many people have already been displaced, so they're less likely then to apply for the assistance. Localities who receive direct allocations have been better about distributing that assistance, but in general, many of the goals that we set 18 months ago have gone unfulfilled, especially the goal to get assistance into hands as quickly and as easily as possible. I invited Malia Spencer from the Kitchen Inc. in Springfield, Missouri to give a more on-the-ground perspective. Springfield has currently experienced a significant surge in new cases with a 7-day average of over 200 cases per day. To put that in perspective, that's in line with the numbers they saw in early January of 2021. Malia?
Thank you for allowing me to be a part of today's call and sharing a little bit of what's happening in Southwest Missouri. So for those of you who may not be as familiar with the Kitchen Inc. here in Springfield, Missouri, we've been around for 38 years. focusing on housing our at-risk folks living in poverty. And we've focused our efforts over the last few years specifically on housing. We do that through 5 main programs. Our first one being our Home at Last, which serves veterans and their families through the SSVF grant through the Department of Veteran Affairs. We also have our community housing, which is everyone else, singles, adults, families, just anyone chronically homeless. That's served through our HUD grant programs. And we also offer an emergency shelter, which is micro-sized apartments. It's not congregate living, but it is emergency shelter for up to 90 days. And then we also have a rare breed youth center, which is focusing on homeless and at-risk youth as a central hub for them to get resources. And then our last and final program is that we know we need more affordable housing to address homelessness. And so the Kitchen Inc. has 4 housing developments specifically for low-income affordable housing. So out of those programs, we are serving a multitude of individuals in our community, majority obviously being homeless. And we have been working with our COC, our Continuum of Care here locally, to address why is there a hesitancy in COVID vaccination. And working with them, we found 3 main reasons that our clients are giving. And in order of popularity would be number 1, they believe it's not safe. Number 2, they have distrust in our healthcare system. And number 3, they think the vaccine is just too new. Those are probably similar reasons that you hear from other individuals as well. And so one of the ways the kitchen is looking at addressing those hesitancies to becoming vaccinated is we are holding a clinic, an upcoming clinic at our Rare Breed Youth Center for at-risk and homeless youth. And what we're doing there, we're working really hand in hand with our health department and trying to help that distrust in the healthcare system by having the same folks that are going to be giving the vaccine coming weeks ahead and having one-on-one question and answer time with our youth to help dispel any myths about the vaccine, establish that trust. And then about 3 weeks from the date that they start those conversations, they'll be the same people giving the vaccine to those youth. That'll be held in August. So we're hoping to increase that vaccination rate within our homeless population here in Springfield. Now, beyond our COVID problems that we have going on and our high surge that is happening in our county, we have a plethora of housing issues, just like many of you on the call do as well. And we have seen here the real estate market is really hot for if you own a home, you can sell it top dollar. And that means of all values of our housing, doesn't matter if it's a $500,000 home or a $90,000 home, we're seeing folks selling and then entering the rental market until they can figure out what they're going to do, maybe wait until the housing market decreases and buy another home. So what that means for us is that we have more competition in the rental housing market for the folks that we're trying to help. And what is also happening is that more people are entering the market as well because maybe they've had a decrease in income due to COVID or just lost their jobs entirely. So they may not be or were not eligible for low-income affordable housing prior to the pandemic, but now they are. So we're seeing an audience enter the low-income affordable housing market that we haven't seen before. Again, competition becoming stronger for the clients that we are serving. And then usually those folks that are entering this affordable housing market that haven't been before are, shall I say, more attractive on paper. They don't have all of those same barriers of the folks that we are working with, such as maybe evictions, felonies, or whatever has led them to homelessness. So that just continues to push our clients down on the list, and which makes it really hard for us to get clients in. So one of the ways that we're battling that is we are encouraging our clients to take a more active approach in finding housing. Even though we have staff on here that helps them with that, we are finding clients that take a more active approach and reach out to landlords to perhaps share their story or why they should take a chance on them. Landlords are being more willing to listen and willing to work with us with those clients that we serve. all in all, we know that we are never going to end homelessness unless we have more affordable housing. To put the need into perspective here in Springfield, I'll end with this, is that our low-income affordable housing developments, all of those rooms are about 222 units that we have. I have an application waiting today on every one of those. Our applications wait list is over 200 strong. So the need is great here in Springfield. That's why we need more affordable housing. And that's why the Kitchen Inc. will be an advocate for building more affordable housing in our community. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks, Malia, and thanks, Sarah. It looks like, and thank you too, both for going through. I see that you've been answering questions along the way, so thanks for doing that. It looks like there's one question here. Let's see. Do you know when HUD will announce the 2021 NOFA for COCs? Yeah, I don't know if Sarah or Malia, if you know that, but we can also find out here on our end as well and get back to people.
I think it's generally sort of a surprise, right? We get a little bit of lead up, but there's not, they don't give us a date necessarily.
Absolutely. All right, well, it looks like those are the questions that we have. And again, thanks for answering the questions in the Q&A box. So we're gonna move on to our next field update from Minnesota. And I'm gonna turn it over to Eric Hoggy, who's the Executive Director of HomeLine in Minnesota. It's all yours.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, Eric Hoggy from HomeLine, Minnesota. HomeLine is a statewide organization that serves renters throughout the state of Minnesota. Our main program is a free and confidential hotline that any renter in the state can contact and get free and confidential legal advice. We also do policy advocacy, community organizing, and landlord and tenant education. But I'm here to share briefly about what's happening in Minnesota. Our state eviction moratorium recently ended, and there was a timed phase out. And there's a lot of information on your screen there. I'm going to go into not a ton of detail because all that information is on our website if you are interested. But basically, where this phase out came from and sort of how it works. Here in Minnesota, we had a governor initiated executive order that suspended, in addition to non-payment evictions, it prevented many other types of informal displacement like notices to vacate, lease non-renewals, as well as evictions for lease violations. So it was really fairly protective as compared to maybe the CDC order or other states. Unfortunately, it was relied on 30-day extensions of our governor's broader peacetime emergency powers, which became the subject of almost all the political debate here at in the Minnesota legislature. And here in Minnesota, we do have a divided legislature, a Democratic governor and Democrats that lead the House, but Republicans lead the Senate. So there was a lot of debate there. Our organization and many other legal service groups and grassroots organizers, tenant organizers, played a lot of roles at the beginning and throughout the suspension by immediately advocating for a clear timeline and a notice period at the end of the suspension. We knew right up front that it was going to be a confusing time at the end. Our organization has advised nearly 7,000 households on pandemic issues. We shared a lot of that aggregate data and stories, the experiences of our clients with the media and lawmakers. And that really helped to guide the policy discussion around maintaining the suspension throughout the last year and a half, but as well as how it's being phased out. And it basically came down to that advocacy, getting that advocacy across to just a handful of key state lawmakers to demonstrate how just ending the suspension in a single day or over 30 days would be a disaster as compared to a thoughtful timed phase out that also takes into account hundreds of millions of dollars in rental assistance. And these negotiations led right up to the end of both Minnesota's regular legislative session and a special session that ended the day before our state's fiscal year ended. So it was really threatening not getting budget bills passed, which was tied to this law, really was threatening a government shutdown and impacting much more than just housing. But we felt it, most people felt it was generally in everybody's best interest to have some sort of guardrails to space things out. So what's on your screen is sort of a brief overview of what happens. Our phase out began on June 30th. And and it includes a key protection all the way up until June 1st of 2022. That key protection is that evictions for non-payment of rent are prohibited if the tenant has a pending COVID-19 emergency rental assistance program application. That definition of those programs is basically the assistance that was put across through to Minnesota by those two federal acts that's brought around $670 million to Minnesota for rental assistance. So that protects tenants as long as they have a pending application throughout this whole timeline till June of next year. But then on key dates, and we're up to phase 2 right now, which began just last Wednesday. On day 1, on June 30th of phase 1, many of the exceptions that were under our original suspension remained in place. The key thing was that landlords could begin terminating or non-renewal leases for breaches of lease, which is a key component that was protected during the suspension. And then this big step that just happened last Wednesday is that evictions can now be filed for material violations of the lease. We think that, we believe there's been approximately 80 filed in Minnesota since the phase out began on June 30th. And more than half of those were just in the past 3 business days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of last week. We expect a lot more to be coming this week, as some landlords, unfortunately, may use the ability to evict for a breach of lease as a way to get around some of the other protections. Then there's a series of other phases over the next few months that you can see on your screen. The other really important one is on October 12th. That's when basically almost all the protections in the phase-out bill, the phase-out law, go away, except for that long-standing one that goes until June of next year that protects tenants with a pending rental assistance application. Landlords will be able to just non-renew or terminate leases without any cause. You know, we are a no-cause state here, so they can just end it with adequate notice and no reason. And then tenants can be evicted for holding over if they stay. One other key piece I really want to highlight is that the law until October 12th requires that landlords provide a 15-day pre-eviction notice if they're going to file an eviction for non-payment of rent. That's a really important provision. Make sure that tenants know that they could be eligible for rental assistance and know how much they owe after potentially 15 months of the suspension. And Minnesota, before all of this, was one of only a handful of states that did not have any sort of pre-eviction notice requirement. And so that's a policy that we've been working on, and many other advocates have been working for in Minnesota, and we hope to make something maybe permanent in the near future. The only thing I'll close on is just that the law does leave quite a bit to be interpreted by the courts. One of the things is our main program, our Make COVID rental assistance program here is called Rent Help MN. It's been really slow rolling out. It is moving a bit faster now, but we're concerned that some folks in the public may have lost confidence in the program and may want to just evict and get around some of these protections, even though there's hundreds of millions of dollars waiting for them to get whole, basically. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. And if you want to check out some of the work that Eric was referencing and some of the work of Homeline in Minnesota, I know that we have a link to the website posted, so take a look at that. There is one question, Eric. Let's see, any generic advice on how to build and sustain advocacy? Second part of that, and what might others learn from Minnesota leaders?
Yeah, so we relied on a state network we have here, the Homes for All coalition that had a number of tenant, prior to the pandemic, had a number of tenant landlord focused tenant protections on their agenda. So that was really useful, but then also combining that advocacy, which that coalition is a lot of service providers and nonprofit landlords, developers, and housing advocates, but also combining that with grassroots organizing. We were partnered with a lot of grassroots groups, neighborhood associations, tenant-based groups like United Renters for Justice or Inquilinos Unidos por Justicia and the Alliance. A lot of groups in the metro area here were focused on engaging with renters, being able to really share the stories of tenants that were impacted financially and by the public health crisis, and making sure that got across to key leaders. And yeah, I think as far as advice for leaders, like maybe looking at drafting, preparing language like this, the details really matter with evictions. I mean, otherwise you end up in court arguing interpretations of language and words that that can complicate things. For example, our the law that we got that was passed here has this provision for requiring a notice. The notice says that the law says that the notice has to say how much rent is past due. Now, does that mean that you have to also include past due utilities or other fees? We don't know yet until a court is interpreting that, and that makes things confusing. So it really is important to get the details right. We think most of the details are right on this. It's going to protect a lot of people from displacement, but there are there's some hiccups that could cause problems.
Great. And the last question, it's coming from a person who lives in New Jersey. And this person wants to know, do you know if the current eviction moratorium protects renters that are being evicted for reasons other than non-payment, such as transference of ownership of a home?
So that's a unique question, because we actually, our suspension, when it was in effect up until June 30th, there was an exception to allow a family member of a landlord or the landlord themselves to move in if they gave proper notice. That actually went away with the phase out beginning on June 30th. I would say that a landlord in that situation that wants to sell the property or move in or something, if I'm understanding the question right, probably they have to wait until October 12th, phase 5. So that's when a landlord would be able to just end a lease with a valid notice under the lease. So if you're on a month-to-month lease, they just give you 30 days. Otherwise, you really need a reason. Either the tenant has to be materially violating the lease or refusing to apply for rental assistance, or in August or September, it'll open up to tenants who are ineligible for rental assistance. So that's, I think, that answers that question.
Absolutely. And then just the last thing, and it's really just a clarification on something you said earlier. Someone wants to know, did you say that you worked with the landlords and apartment association folks and courts?
Well, we definitely worked with, we were in communication with courts, as a lot of legal service providers were, and exactly how this is going to play out in the courts is different by court jurisdiction. Hennepin, where our largest county here and where Minneapolis is located, they are ramping up to tackle about 4 calendars a day with about 20 cases per calendar, 4 days a week. They're going to try to get through 400 cases in a week. Is that going to be feasible with all the questions that may come up? Our organization held regular webinars about the law, and there was plenty of landlords on that. The Landlord Association here in Minnesota pretty much opposed the suspension, and close to the end of it, they actually filed a lawsuit against the governor and I think the Attorney General's office. I don't think that they like this phase out. I'm not sure why, because it is designed to try to get them paid through the hundreds of millions of dollars. But so there. That being said, there are landlords, nonprofit developers, nonprofit landlords that are part of the coalitions that we were involved in, like Homes for All. So they're not all under one umbrella, really.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Eric. And thanks for joining us on the call today.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. So we're going to move on to California. And we have with us today Anya Lawler, who is a public advocate with the Public Interest Advocates in California. Anya, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks so much for having me today. Again, my name's Anya Lawler. I'm with Public Interest Advocates. We are a lobbying and consulting firm in California that represents a number of housing justice focused organizations in the state capitol, including Housing California, the National Housing Law Project and the California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation. And we've been heavily engaged in negotiating the various eviction protection bills that have passed the California legislature during COVID. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about AB 832, which was the most recent bill that extended California's eviction protections. So way back last September, we originally passed AB 3088 in California, which said that a tenant cannot be evicted for non-payment of rent so long as they return a declaration that says they have some kind of COVID-related financial impact, either a loss of income or increased expenses. And at that time, the caveat was that those protections would remain in place through the end of January of 2021, so long as the tenant by that time, by the end of January, paid 25% of the rent that was due. So 25% by the end of January of all back rent that was owed during the COVID time period would buy a tenant protection from eviction forever for that non-payment. In addition to putting non-payment evictions on pause, the bill also required that all evictions have some sort of just cause. So no cause evictions were also banned, although other types of evictions were able to move forward. But that cut down significantly on the number of evictions that were moving forward in California. And then, you know, come January, we were still in the thick of the pandemic. And so we advocated for an extension of AB 3088. And at the same time, that was when the federal government came through with the first round of federal rental assistance. And so in a bill, SB 91, that was passed towards the end of January of this year, we both extended those eviction protections through June of this year. And we also developed what's known as the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, or ERAP, which is what California calls its rental assistance program. And that program kicked off in March of this year. It's a little bit complicated because of the nearly $5 billion in rental assistance that is flowing to California. About $3 billion is being administered by the state, and the remainder is being administered by local jurisdictions because cities and counties in California were given a choice as to whether or not they wanted to be in the state program or they wanted to do their own thing. So, you know, fast forward to June and you know, low-income Californians were still struggling, and it was very clear that we were going to need to extend those eviction protections again. While the California economy is in recovery, that same recovery is not yet anywhere close to reaching down to lower wage jobs where most low-income Californians are going to be employed. And so it was clear to us that low-income Californians were going to continue to need protections. And at the same time, although the rental assistance program had rolled out, very little money was going out the door. When the state first launched the ERAP program, the application was incredibly complicated. It took people hours and hours and hours and hours to fill out. There were a lot of barriers to entry. Even though the program launched in March, it took until early June for the application to be available in the 6 major languages spoken by low-income tenants in California, which you know, created tremendous challenges to applying. And the way the rental assistance program was structured originally was that landlords could apply and they could get 80% of all back rent owed to them from April of 2020 through whenever they applied, if they agreed to forgive 20% of the rent and not evict the tenant. Tenants, however, were only eligible to get 25% of the rent. And again, as you may recall, that's how much a tenant needed to pay to sort of win permanent protection from eviction for the consequences of that debt. However, obviously it didn't clear the debt. The reason that the 25% was settled on at that time was partially that, and also partially because back in January when that scheme was originally developed, we only had 1 round of federal rental assistance. And so there was a lot of concern that the feds wouldn't come through with a 2nd round, or even if they did, we didn't know how much it was gonna be. And so there was a lot of hesitancy to promising tenants who had to apply without their landlord's participation any more than that. So that kind of got kicked down the road. So in June, we advocated along with legal services organizations and tenant organizing groups and tenant unions around the state and a whole host of other advocacy organizations for both an extension of those eviction protections yet again, and also for a number of substantial changes to the rental assistance program itself to try to entice more landlords to apply and to get money out the door faster. And so what we ended up in 832 was an extension of those non-payment eviction protections through the end of September of this year. And then we also changed the way the rental assistance dollars roll out. Landlords are now eligible to apply to get 100% of all back rent that was owed to them during COVID. And even if they had previously agreed to that 80-20 deal, they can get the remainder of the money still. It's retroactive. And tenants whose landlords refuse to apply can now apply directly on their own and also get 100% of the back rent owed, which is a huge relief. The 100%, frankly, is a little bit of a gamble. It makes a lot of us nervous because nobody has a really solid handle on the total amount of back rent that is owed in California. And the gamble, right, is that they're going to have enough money from the federal government to pay back 100% of the back rent for all eligible tenants. If not, you will definitely see us advocating for perhaps a state general fund solution to that problem later down the line. So a couple other things that happened in that bill. So while the eviction protections end at the end of September, from October through the end of March of 2022, there is a new procedure that comes into play that was designed to allow non-payment evictions to move forward for high-income tenants. And this was really a political issue. The landlord groups were convinced that there was a significant number of high-income tenants who could afford to pay their rent, but were not, because they knew about these eviction protections and they knew they couldn't be evicted for the consequences of non-payment. And so these new protections basically stay an eviction. So if a landlord files an eviction from October through March, they have to affirmatively show that they have applied for rental assistance and the tenant was not eligible. And if they can't do that, essentially that tenant gets tracked into the rental assistance program until such time as either it's determined that they're not eligible, or if they're eligible, they get the money and that clears it. So that should provide a significant protection through the end of March for those tenants at 80% AMI and below who are struggling to get signed up for rental assistance, who maybe still don't know about it, or frankly, who don't think it's real because it's been so slow to get out the door. So we're excited about that. We're going to be working closely with the courts to really make sure that works seamlessly to ensure that we get people tracked into rental assistance rather than evicted. A couple of other things that we won in AB 832. All evictions and debt collection actions related to the COVID time period, which is defined as April of 2020 through September of this year, will be permanently masked, meaning that there will be no public record. It won't be a black mark on anyone's credit, and it shouldn't affect their ability to apply for rental housing in the future. That had previously been time limited, so it was a big win to make that a permanent protection. Landlords also, on a time-limited basis, are prohibited from selling or assigning rental debt. So, you know, essentially that is meant to entice them to just apply for the rental assistance and clear the debt that way. Let's see, what else am I forgetting? That's really the broad overview. Rental assistance, frankly, is still very, very slow to roll out in California. There's only been about $200,000 in the $200 million in the state program that has gone out the door. Some of the locals that are administering their own programs have had much higher rates of success, but we do expect, with all of the changes to the application process that have taken place in the last month, we hope that things are going to roll out a lot faster. I will say that we do not think that there is any appetite in the California legislature to extend any of this any further. It was a struggle to sell an extension this time around. We really relied on a lot of advocacy, and frankly, the press was hugely helpful because the press was really great about publicizing how little money had gone out the door, and it seemed ridiculous that we would be talking about lifting eviction protections when the state was sitting on close to $3 billion that was meant to solve that problem and hadn't managed to get it out the door yet. So the press really making an issue of that and publicizing that was hugely helpful. Leadership in both houses of our legislature were also hugely helpful in convincing members of the legislature that this was really something that we needed to do, that we couldn't just rip these protections away while low-income people were still struggling and there was so much money available. So it was a heavy lift. We're happy we got it done, and we hope that it is enough to get low-income tenants through March and get everybody who's eligible tracked into that rental assistance program.
All right, great. Thank you, Anya. We had a few questions that came in, but just really in the interest of time, Anya, if you don't mind, if you have time, if you can take a look at the two, I think, questions that came in and answer those, that would be fantastic. All right, and again, Anya, thank you so much for sharing that information with us today. We're gonna move on to the NLIC team. So we have Rebecca Ye, who's the Senior Research Analyst at the Coalition, Sarah Gallagher, who's the Senior Project Director of Erase, which is End Rental Arrears to Stop Eviction, and Emma Foley, who's our research assistant as well. They're gonna give you some updates on the Erase project. Rebecca, take it away.
Thanks, Renee. Hi, everybody. I'm going to give a quick update on how the rollout of the Treasury Emergency Rental Assistance Programs has been going. Next slide, please. As of today, July 19th, not July 12th, as it says on the slide, NLIC has been tracking over, nearly 2,000 programs, and that includes 468 Treasury Emergency Rental Assistance Programs covering most jurisdictions in the US. And the Puerto Rico Emergency Rental Assistance Program just opened, so we'll be adding that shortly into our tracking as well. So all of that translates to approximately $23.8 billion of the first tranche of funding that's actively being implemented. Next slide, please. Approximately half of the programs we're tracking explicitly allows for self-attestation in some form, most commonly to show COVID hardship or income. Only 1 in 4 programs are explicitly allowing direct-to-tenant assistance. And it's really important for programs to communicate to applicants that they can self-attest rather than, when they're unable to provide proof of, for example, COVID hardship or cash income, tenants also really need to know if they can receive assistance directly in the case their landlord refuses to participate in the program. And my colleague, Emma Foley, will be sharing a preview of a paper the team will be publishing this week on direct-to-tenant assistance and how emergency rental assistance programs have implemented this. These program design features are really just one area of how we can measure how well programs are doing. Approval and distribution of funds is another way we can measure this. Next slide, please. The Coalition is also tracking programs with dashboards communicating how many funds have been approved or distributed. So I'm going to highlight a couple of programs that have been particularly slow to disperse their funds and some programs that have been relatively successful in distributing their funds. So just some basic orientation. The table includes the amount of funding that has been approved or distributed, as well as the percent of the program's ERA allocation that has been approved or distributed. So to note, the percent of funds here include the percent of funds that have been approved or distributed includes the amount approved or distributed out of the 90% of funds allocated for direct assistance. On the left is a list of tracked programs that have distributed less than 5% of their funds. And as you can see, all of the programs in this side of the table are state programs, includes Colorado, Arizona, Rhode Island, Oregon, and Wyoming. On the right table is all the programs that have approved or distributed at least 35% of their funding. This includes Cook County, Illinois, Honolulu County, Hawaii, and Pima County, Arizona, which have approved or distributed nearly 70% of their allocation. The state of Texas has approved or distributed around 47% of its funding. And this is much more than any other state that we're tracking that also has a dashboard. So the slow rate of approving and distributing funds is really, really concerning. Very few are operating quickly enough to reach renters. It's extremely concerning given the end of the eviction moratorium at the end of this month and the general lack of tenant protections that are available to many tenants in many jurisdictions in the US. So we're going to continue to track how programs are doing. And next slide, please. You'll actually be able to see an update to the dashboard this week or next. We'll be converting the dashboard to include percentages instead of numbers. We'll also begin to track programs that are offering assistance for other housing expenses, namely relocation assistance, late fees, hotel motel stays, internet costs, or other housing expenses. And then lastly, the dashboard will also begin to have a tracker of the dispersal of state ERA funds. So you'll be able to get a better sense of how quickly states are approving or distributing funds from there. And I'll pass it on to Emma.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. So next, we just wanted to highlight a new research brief titled Direct-to-Tenant Payment Implementation, Increasing Flexibility and Equity in Emergency Rental Assistance Programs. This brief aims to provide a framework for how programs can incorporate direct-to-tenant assistance, and it will be released tomorrow on July 20th. If you're subscribed to NLIHC's mailing list, you should receive an e-blast with a link to the report, and a link will also be included in the follow-up email for this call sent tomorrow. The report covers three main areas. The first section provides an overview of the Department of Treasury's guidance and policies related to direct-to-tenant payments. Importantly, the Department of Treasury strongly encourages the use of direct-to-tenant payments for ERA-1 when landlords do not respond to program requests or refuse to participate outright. And for ERA-2, Treasury requires that programs provide direct-to-tenant assistance when landlords do not participate. They also allow programs to offer direct-to-tenant assistance first and immediately to the tenant. The second section details the need for direct-to-tenant payments. Research indicates that landlord participation is a prevalent challenge among ERA programs. A survey conducted by NLIHC, the Housing Initiative at Penn, and the NYU Furman Center found that nearly 50% of ERA programs operating in 2020 identified landlord participation as a barrier. Given this information, providing direct-to-tenant assistance can serve as a bridge to assist tenants whose landlords are apprehensive or wary about participating in the program. And the third section details key direct-to-tenant design features with relevant examples. This was largely informed by interviews with administrators of 4 programs providing direct-to-tenant assistance: the state of Maine, the state of Texas, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, and Cameron County, Texas. This section details how these programs implement 6 steps of the direct-to-tenant payment process: landlord outreach, outreach tracking, program accountability, tenant requirements, making tenant payments, and transparency about direct-to-tenant availability. Next slide. The report highlights several key takeaways. First, programs should eliminate any added burdensome documentation requirements for tenants who receive funding directly. After meeting the eligibility requirements, tenants should not have to provide onerous documentation about proof of rental payments when they receive funding directly. Second, programs should make clear on their public documents and program websites that direct-to-tenant assistance is available for tenants with landlords who are unwilling to participate. This will prevent tenants with uncooperative landlords from assuming that they are ineligible and therefore not applying. Then third, in addition to direct-to-tenant payments, programs should provide housing stability services to ensure tenants are stably housed after their arrears are paid. Once again, this brief will be released tomorrow and will be available on the NLIHC website. And next, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Gallagher to discuss NLIHC's ERASE project.
Great. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Rebecca. You can go to the next slide. Great, so I'm just going to take a moment to remind folks about our RFP, talk about some upcoming webinars that we have planned, and then provide sort of information on a tip for the week around ERASE and some things that we've been thinking about that might be helpful in thinking about program implementation as we head toward the end of the federal moratorium. So just as a reminder, the ERASE RFP is due tomorrow. We will put the RFP in the chat for anyone who has not had a chance to look at it, but we are hoping to award 20 to 25 grants to community partners and nonprofit organizations to help assist with the implementation of the ERA funding as we go forward. 1 year grants will range from the amount of $60,000 to $80,000, and once we do the review, we're hoping to launch these by August 1st, 2020. You can submit completed proposals to ERASE project at nlihc.org. And if you have any questions or need more information, you can always feel free to contact me directly at sgallagher@nlihc.org. So next, we're really excited to announce the End Rental Arrears to Stop Evictions, or ERASE webinar series. This is going to be a 3-part series that will correlate directly with the ERASE call to action, which is really looking to work with state and local partners, with programs, community stakeholders, and others to focus our efforts to ensure that ERA programs are visible, that they're accessible, and that they're preventive. And so we have created this 3-part series that will launch July 28th, 2021 at 3 o'clock. And we'll then go over the next 3 weeks. So the first webinar, Visible, Ensuring Equitable Outreach, Marketing, and Targeting of Emergency Rental Assistance, will focus on tools and best practices that ERA programs could incorporate to ensure outreach efforts and resources are effectively reaching neighborhoods and communities with the greatest risks and needs for assistance. Our second webinar, titled Accessible, Creating Flexible, Streamlined, and Low Barrier Application Processes, will be the following week, August 4th. And that will really cover strategies that state and local programs can incorporate into program design to support flexible, streamlined, and low barrier processes and facilitate access to and disbursement of financial support to landlords and tenants. And then our third series in the series is Preventive, Connecting Emergency Rental Assistance to Courts and Tenant Protections. And it will highlight strategies to prevent evictions, housing displacement, and homelessness by offering flexible, holistic, and preventive interventions and creating formal partnerships with state and local courts to support eviction prevention and diversion in coordination with ERA programs. We'll hear about tenant protections that can be aligned with emergency rental assistance, as well as from state and local programs on how they're using data to track eviction cases and conduct advocacy. And that will be held on August 11th. We will put a registration link in the chat, and you can also find registration link in our weekly memo publication. All of the webinars will be recorded and available afterwards, so if you can't attend them in person, don't worry, the resources will be there after the webinar series. Great. And then lastly, I wanted to offer this sort of ERASE tip of the week. I know we haven't done this before, and we may or may not be able to offer tips every week, but we were having a conversation with our cohort of our community partners last week, and really talking about communities planning for the end of the federal moratorium. And we had a really robust conversation on how to speed up ERA outreach in the application processes, especially those who may already have an eviction filing in the queue. Hearing a lot about there are already folks who have cases at the court, and they may come up quickly once the moratorium ends. So one strategy what we were talking about that gained a lot of traction that we wanted to share with you all today as our ERASE tip of the week was the utilization of administrative data to quickly identify at-risk households and streamline processes to prevent eviction and prevent housing loss. And so using administrative data and data matching has been widely used in healthcare systems and other sort of crisis systems to identify and provide assertive outreach and engagement to people with complex health conditions, to people who may have multiple barriers in accessing care, or to populations that may have been systemically
disconnected from the system. So with the ERA programs, we're thinking about using the same ideas of using data to identify those most at risk, and then using administrative data as a proxy for documentation that the applicant may have trouble accessing, maybe income data or other data that may be holding up or slowing down an application. So some examples that came up that we wanted to pass along to you all were accessing court data to outreach and to prioritize those who have filings. So really getting court data in making sure that that's aligned with the ERA programs and identifying who may have a hearing coming up and referring them quickly to the resources they may need. Another strategy was matching ERA and court data, or allowing courts and judges to look up households with an ERA application process so that they can slow down or pause an eviction process while that application has time to go through. And then the third strategy was data matching with HMIS, with Health and Human Services, or other public systems that may have documentation that they can use as a proxy for some of the requirements in the application, and being able to use that. So I wanted to share that along as you're talking with your programs, as you're thinking about implementation, as some strategies you might want to consider. So Renee, thank you. And I'm happy to answer any questions about the RFP or the webinar series.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for sharing that with us. And so what we'll do, because I know we're at a little bit after 4 o'clock Eastern time, so we are running a bit over. So we're going to move quickly on to Sarah Sadian, who's the Vice President of Policy, who's going to provide some updates for us. Sarah.
Hey, everybody. I'll try to make this as quick as possible. This is going to be a really busy and revealing week. We expect to learn a lot more by the end of it about what's happening with the infrastructure bill. So let me just give you a quick update if I can. So today, Senator Schumer, Majority Leader Schumer, is going to be setting in motion a procedural vote, which might happen as soon as Wednesday, to begin the process on voting for a bipartisan infrastructure package. And he's also set the same day, Wednesday, as when Democrats will start working on the other package, that budget reconciliation package. We will know at that point how much money there is available for affordable housing in this infrastructure deal. So as you recall, the bipartisan deal is not, we don't expect housing money in there, but it's important because it sheds light on, it is necessary in order to get all the Democrats willing to vote for the other bill. So we're paying really close attention to that bipartisan bill, even though it does not include housing money. So where do the two bills stand? Well, the bipartisan bill is on pretty shaky ground right now. No text has been written. Republicans are starting to push back on pay-fors that would offset the cost of the bill. Other Republicans are really voicing frustration that the two bills are sort of being tied together, even though not explicitly, or even though Biden had walked back his threat about vetoing one of the bills if the other bill wasn't there. Republicans are also pushing back on the timing. They're saying things are moving much too quickly and that this Wednesday deadline that Schumer set is not helpful. But Senator Schumer is keeping that pressure on. Like I said, he's filing the motion today. The idea is that he'll file the motion on the shell bill, and then during the amendment process, they'll replace it with the text for the bipartisan bill once they have that text. But think about this vote Wednesday as a test about whether or not a bipartisan deal will go forward or if it's going to die a slow death. But in terms of the larger budget reconciliation bill, some progress is being made there, and in part it's because there's been so much work on this bipartisan bill. So remember, this is a bill that includes housing investments, and we're working really hard focusing on this budget reconciliation bill. Senate Democrats last week came to an agreement about the overall spending package for the bill. That's going to be $3.5 trillion. And there are some good signs that Democrats are, for the most part, really aligned on that overall spending number. So Bernie Sanders, who's very progressive, he was previously calling for $6 trillion. Now he's endorsed the $3.5 trillion plan. Moderates like Mark Warner of Virginia has also endorsed it. We're also getting good signs from Senator Manchin. So last week when Senate Democrats met with President Biden, to talk about specifics with the bill. There were reports afterwards that Manchin said that he supports budget reconciliation. He's willing to go forward with the bill, but he is keeping his eye on certain things like whether it's paid for and some concern about like fossil fuel and climate change provisions, but not housing provisions. So things are moving forward much more quickly than over the last couple of months. And this is really the time where we need advocates to be laser focused on keeping the pressure up. So there's a couple ways you can do that. The first thing you can do is ask your Democratic members of the House to co-sponsor 2 bills that were formally introduced by House Financial Services Committee Maxine Waters, and I'll go over each of those bills. So the first bill is the Housing is Infrastructure Act. This is HR 4497. It is a $600 billion proposal from Chairwoman Waters for what she wants to see in the infrastructure bill, and it includes all 3 of the House campaign's top priorities. What's important here is that you see that Waters is going for really robust investments. Remember that the president overall had proposed $200 billion for housing. He upped that because of pressure from advocates to $318 billion. Now we see champions like Waters going even further and calling for $600 billion. So the bill includes, like I said, 3 of our 3 major priorities. It includes a major expansion of rental assistance, about $200 billion for rental assistance. It includes $75 billion for public housing, so $5 billion above what they had been previously asking, and $45 billion for the National Housing Trust Fund to build more homes for people with the lowest incomes. There are also really good provisions around fair housing compliance and climate change, making sure that 15% of the capital dollars are used to address resiliency and energy efficiency. So that's the first bill, HR 4497. The Housing is Infrastructure Act. The second bill is the Ending Homelessness Act. This is HR 4496. So she introduced this one a second before the other one. This is her bill that would create a universal rental assistance program to ensure that every eligible household gets the help that they need. This is phased in over 10 years, starting with households with the very lowest incomes and going up each year afterwards until everyone is covered. It also includes many of the reforms that we've been advocating for, like banning source of income discrimination, having money for fair housing enforcement, using small area fair market rents so that people have more housing choice, et cetera. And both of those bills were introduced last week with more than 90 national organizations on board, which is huge. So getting co-sponsors to both of those bills helps now when conversations are ongoing about how much money should be included for housing investments in an infrastructure bill. And they also help build support for longer term solutions later on. I will say there is one other thing that folks can be doing over the next couple of days. We, for many weeks, had talked about the Dear Colleague letter that Senator Merkley and Representative Torres were circulating. We have about 18 senators on the letter, 106 representatives. So a really great showing from all of you, especially on the House side. On the Senate side, I think we're trying to get a couple more senators on board before we close up that letter. So if your senator is not on the list, if you could please keep that outreach up. I think we're trying to get to 25, 26 senators before we can close it and then send it off to leadership. So I'm going to share in the chat box a link, a list of the 18 senators who are on the Dear Colleague letter. If your Democratic senator is not on this list, we encourage you to reach out to them very, very quickly. We need to send this letter to Speaker Pelosi and Senator Schumer right now because they're currently negotiating these numbers and we want to make sure that housing gets its fair share. So those are my takeaways for all of you, to focus on co-sponsors to the 2 Waters bills and to, if you have time, focus on getting additional senators for the Dear Colleague letter. And with that, I'll turn it back to Renee.
Thank you, Sarah. Great information. And thank you all for hanging in there with us to the very, very end. We will post this recording of this webinar on our website. So visit www.nlic.org/housed for more information and for this video. And also check out information on Outreach as well. Thank you so very much for joining today, and we look forward to you joining next week. Take care.